it's saved so much time. It shortcutted so many things. It helps you organize your thoughts. If you can brain dump. One of my favorite things with AI is the ChatGPT app. Just
Mhm.
brain dump, use your voice in that app. And I speak to it for like 4 minutes, usually when preparing for an episode. And I'll put in all my thoughts, all of the ideas around that person or the topic that I want to cover. And I'll ask it to summarize my thoughts, put it in a flow that makes sense. It's cohesive, maybe help me structure my thoughts in a pattern. And honestly, a lot of curriculum can be developed that way. And it's
Mhm.
unique still, but it's now helping us form these in a way that can be followed along with. So
Welcome back to SEOleverage.com. This is episode 112, and I'm so pleased that we have our podcasting expert, AI expert, Joe Fier, back on the show. Welcome back, Joe.
thanks for having me, Gert. This is fun. I'm happy to kind of continue the conversation from the last episode we did. It's gonna be great.
Absolutely. It's not that long ago, a few weeks, and we talked about podcasting in the age of AI. Obviously, a lot of things have changed. A lot of things are still the same. You might be as a guest on a podcast, you might be hosting your own show, you might be doing both. And the level of success, it seems, is very much tied to how you really frame the entire thing, how you prepare for guesting, how you prepare for recording a show. We know from SEO, very often we guide our clients with the topic selection, with what kind of topics they should be talking about. So then the resulting document also is in line with what Google might want to know. So there are a lot of things, and where we were a little bit more generalistic on the episode 109 a few weeks ago, I really want to dive a little bit deeper today. What do you think?
I love it, man. I love getting deep, and we can go deep down the rabbit hole wherever you want to go. And I have some ideas, but tell me where you want to start here.
I would definitely want to start pretty much with the end in mind, which is people do podcasts or podcast guesting because they want to make a profit. Right? So
Right.
they have in mind this is going to make me more money in one way or the other one. And I know you have been doing a lot of thinking here, have you developed your own system around this kind of thing as what is this podcasting to profit system? And I
Hmm.
really would want you to explain this to my audience because I know a lot of them are podcasters, a lot of them want or are already guests on shows. So maybe you can walk us through this system a little bit, and I'll
Yeah.
probably then ask a few questions here and there.
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's a lot. So I'll start this off by saying, and it's what you alluded to already. You don't need a podcast to leverage podcasting, and almost don't even want to start with the term podcasting because some people might get turned away because
Hmm.
of whatever reason in our minds. My voice doesn't sound great. I don't want to go on camera because I know a lot of podcasts. You can do stuff on YouTube. That's starting to do a big push for podcasting.
Hmm.
I would just drop all of that for one because you're obviously an expert in your own field. That's who loves podcasting the most. Usually it's someone who's an expert, especially if you have a business. Just think about if you leverage a way of recording and capturing your thoughts and with intention, knowing that, okay, if I do this with a workflow, knowing, the basics of the tools I need to use, and it's not complicated, it's not expensive either. You don't need fancy equipment to do this. I literally recorded a episode the other day on my iPhone in my car, and people thought it was great. So you could drop all these different little things that might hold you back from recording content. And why I love podcasting as the piece, and I know we kind of covered this last time, but now more than ever, I've gotten a lot of feedback from folks over the last handful of weeks since we last chatted, Gert, and everyone's saying, okay, with the podcast, the ones that leverage it, it's very obvious that there's a deeper connection when you speak to your audience with your audience. And when you have your own show, that's great. It's sometimes a lot. It is a lot of work to really grow a show, but the key thing is the people who are listening to you are really attached to your message. They're coming back over and over for you, the host, and they're trusting that the host is going to bring and curate other great people that are going to give a lot of great value. Or if there's solo episodes, they're typically a lot higher engagement than other types of content out there. the thing I love to do is there's this whole guesting approach, and this is where you could drop the idea that you even need your own show. Start with guesting, and this is where I love, and I've been doing more of. I used to do it a lot more in the past, and a lot of folks who come to me are purely just guests on podcasts, but when they realize, oh, when I show up and go to these places that are virtual stages that have an audience that already are tapped into, the things that I am talking about, the offers, the services, products that I have, I can now self-select and figure out who are the people that I want to step in front of on these virtual stages. And the people are waiting. They're already trusting the host of that show that's curated, a beautiful audience that are probably highly engaged with that host. Well, now you get to be essentially propped up right next to that person, on in their stage. And there's no better way to connect with an audience that you can self-select. And there's a whole process to do this. And then I think we talked about the Dream 100 last time, Gert.
Yep.
So that's still like, that's the hub of everything. If you don't know what that is, go back to that previous episode.
Absolutely. I saw the difference in a very direct way because I was launching the SEO Leverage podcast at the same time when I started guesting. So I would get all this feedback from being a guest on a show, and my own podcast wouldn't do anything because I probably had 20 downloads or something like that. So
Sure.
it's like it's like this in the most instant way, I think, with podcasting to see this is actually a medium that can work for you. And
Yeah.
it's the least complicated way, probably, is definitely this guesting. What I found is there's a big difference if you have someone guiding you on how to prepare for such an episode where you're a guest, or if you just go and say, okay, I'm an expert, I can just talk. Of course you can, right? Of course you can, but you might not mention enough results. You might not mention the details. You might not mention what people can do. You might not mention your brand often enough and things like those. I mean, I picked a lot of these things up from you guys in the past. And it's really interesting when you see the difference, right? When you suddenly have something to give away and things like those. It's really, really interesting. How do you prepare your clients? I know you work with people preparing them for these kinds of occasions. What kind of advice do you give them?
Yeah, it's definitely, so it starts with obviously zeroing in who are the people you want to target and start, what are the shows you want to actually start guesting with or guesting on, and knowing what are the needs of those people, because not everybody's audiences are going to be the same. So you obviously have an audience of a lot of folks who are interested in SEO. I doubt it's the number one thing they're always thinking about, but at the same time, maybe for some. But knowing, okay, what is that bigger topic? What's the thing that is going to be related to what the host has curated already? And so I would start with that, but then think about a few angles that really bring people into your world as well. You want to kind of integrate the two as best as possible. So always lead with value on that person's show. And the way that I would help prepare someone for this whole thing is there's a one sheet or an idea of that you can prepare not only yourself as like, hey, here's who I am. So it's kind of like the initial outreach. Like if it's someone you're just meeting, I wouldn't always lead with like, hey, read my bio and this whole thing. But once the conversation gets going, if they're really curious about you and really getting to know you, especially if it's a cold kind of person that hasn't really ever heard your stuff, you could prepare a one sheet about yourself and your podcast, or at least your business and your expertise. And there's a whole slew of things that you could put on there, but essentially it's like, what's your why, what's your purpose behind what you're doing, what are your qualifications, so some of the experience, and diving into what are the topics and the value points that you can bring to their audience.
It's
And
very easy for a podcaster if you get a list of potential topics to then really match which one might be interesting for my audience. At least that's what I found. Even when somebody approaches me, and we're very selective, and really most of the people asking to come to the show probably get a no or a no answer, to be honest. But sometimes when I had someone recently send over like 10 topics, and one was very related to my latest client conversations. So it was just a no-brainer, right? Because I could just really pick and choose. The other ones wouldn't be a fit, but one of the 10 was definitely really good and it was just in line with where we are. So this one sheet is absolutely helpful.
Yeah, the one sheet, and then there's even like a further document which it piggybacks off of what you just said there. And it's so rare that guests on my show, Hustle and Flowchart, will actually send it. Like I had one recently send one, and I was like, "You are the best," and I even told her that. I'm like, "Thank you so much," because this helps. It helps a guest tremendously. Doesn't mean a guest doesn't prepare, but
Yeah.
because everyone has their own way of preparing. But the sheet that I saw from this gal on my podcast basically it was like a one sheet on top, but then it turned into, okay, here are like the three target audiences I typically speak in front of, and then within each bucket or in each audience were a series of like 10 questions or topics. So it was
Beautiful.
very dialed in. Like,
Mhm.
she knew her target audience. You got to know that first. And what are the pains and struggles they're going through, and what do they want?
Mhm.
And it's pretty simple. And let's be honest, you could use things like Chat GPT to really brainstorm some of the topics if you don't know this enough. But I would recommend speaking with your audience and
Yeah.
surveying them and getting real answers,
No,
having
that's beautiful.
conversation.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
So this would be to be a guest on the show.
correct.
I'm
Yeah,
going to translate to or transition this to the next point in your profit scheme here. What is
yeah.
it when you have your own podcast, right? When you have your own podcast, look, just a very quick question at the beginning. How much on a scale of 1 to 10 has podcasting changed with AI recently?
Mm. It's changed a lot in terms of tools,
Mhm.
helping to shortcut a lot of like the brainstorming aspect, the
Yeah.
research phase, tools like Chat GPT. I love perplexity.ai is
Mhm.
one of these tools I go to all the time. And it's great to research a specific topic or a person's name.
Mhm.
And it pulls in all sorts of sources that you can go even deeper in on, and or you can prompt it on even further and dial it in. So Perplexity
Right.
is it's one of my favorite tools. I love it.
Mhm.
But I use it in conjunction with Chat GPT.
Mhm.
Claude.ai is another one that I've been starting to use. If you want to really put in a whole bunch of information, it can distill that. It can input a lot more than Chat GPT can.
Mhm.
So those are the tools I use for a lot of research and organization, and it's saved so much time. It shortcutted so many things. It helps you organize your thoughts. If you can brain dump. One of my favorite things with AI is the Chat GPT app. Just
Mhm.
brain dump, use your voice in that app, and I speak to it for like 4 minutes, usually when preparing for an episode, and I'll put in all my thoughts, all of the ideas around that person or the topic that I want to cover, and I'll ask it to summarize my thoughts. Put it in a flow that makes sense. It's cohesive. Maybe help me structure my thoughts in a pattern. And honestly, a lot of curriculum can be developed that way, and it's
Mhm.
unique still, but it's now helping us form these in a way that can be followed along with. So ChatGPT's app is highly recommended, and you have to be a
I lo-
plus user, I think, for that
I
feature.
lo- I love really individual use cases because with all the AI, it feels like there's so much possible, but hardly anybody has like tangible use cases where you say, okay,
Mm,
this was much harder before and now it's much easier, or it's much better.
yeah,
I see cases where it's different, but it's hard to
yeah,
find things at this stage, and this obviously evolves every month. Harder to find at this stage things that are really easier or really have better output. But I love that you're
oh yeah.
using this really actively. I know a lot of folks who think about starting a podcast these days are worried about things I would probably, after about 100 episodes, say they're not that important or not as important as I thought in the beginning. What are some of those things that you think people could actually really postpone for later that they worry too
Mm,
much about at the beginning?
that's a great question. I think it's partially around some of the quick barriers that people have are the technology. It's the fact that they need to get all this, a soundboard. I use a Rodecaster Pro and a nice setup here, but it's nothing that fancy. But people get hung up on the equipment side.
Hmm.
I think use what you have. Get a good enough microphone in a room that's quiet, some headphones, but you don't need to go all out, for that. Um, Video is a part that's very powerful. I wouldn't postpone it too long because video is definitely on the up and up in terms of YouTube adopting podcasting. But if you just want to stick to one modality, audio, stick there because there's a lot of repurposing and things that we could talk about shortly here, and how to amplify your content still using AI. Things to, let's see, I'm thinking of another way. So when I suggest people when they're starting a show new, I would think about creating a journey before trying to get into, and I need to get all these guests on my podcast and do all this organization scheduling, because that becomes a lot more logistics that aren't really necessary. When you're starting out, I would map out a series of 5 to 10 episodes that are all about you. It's about launching your brand into the world. So really diving into what's the why behind what you're doing. Who are you? And this is kind of the start of the journey that people can take along with you to indoctrinate them into your world. Talk about the things you've done, the people you work with, the case studies. Maybe bring on some customers that you already have. It's like get the ball moving, and you can bulk do these, and a lot of them you can just do solo. So you can block time and just focus on creating content that way. Another way is just to put in some of these guest episodes you've done on other shows, plug them into your own podcast. So if you can kind of double up a little bit that way. I've done that many times, and I would not try to do too much in terms of logistics. I'm thinking of show notes and all the post-production stuff. There's a lot of things you can do there, which we'll chat about that shortly. I don't know if I would sleep on the show notes part though. Like that part of me is like, oh, maybe don't put something on your website, but there's so much benefit to to creating these SEO rich show notes pages based off of your content. And now with AI, there's a lot of ways to shortcut that process. So
we definitely need to extract some information about that part later out of you.
Oh yes. Yes.
I want to continue with one thing people obviously have in mind. They don't do a podcast, but just because it's so much fun to do a podcast, as we said initially, to ultimately make a profit, make this work. And podcasts have been working for me personally even very, very well as lead generation systems. So people hear me on podcasts, they resonate with how we approach SEO here, how we consistently help a lot of different people here. How do I come from a podcast I'm hosting to generating leads for my business?
Yeah. And this is where it comes with the preparation. So when you're guesting on someone else's podcast, that's probably where we want to start with this thought, but it still translates to your own show if you have one. So being prepared and even sharing this in advance with a guest is on like that one sheeter or that guest preparation sheet, like we were talking about. Give the lead gen or the lead magnet that have something prepared that's going to relate with that audience. And again, it could even be multiple offers, kind of talking about the different talking points that you can provide different audiences you speak with. But having that lead magnet available and then knowing and providing that to the guest ahead of time will allow them to already know about it. They'll probably shout it out on your behalf, in that conversation, just kind of naturally. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're shouting that out with permission, of course. You don't want to just go in pitching, but typically at the end or at least somewhere within the episode, the guest typically will want to provide more value to their guests and go a little deeper. So have that thing prepared. Something like a checklist is great. Something that's quick and simple to digest, and just have someone say an automatic yes and verbalize that, and ideally verbalize it as many times as you can, and or at least have the host put it in the show notes, and then they can say, hey, if you want to get any of these resources, dive in deeper with Joe, Gert, whoever is on that podcast, go make sure to go check that out. And you want to make it a no-brainer, and we don't need to go deep on lead magnets, but at least have that prepared, give it to the host ahead of time, make sure they have the links and all that stuff. And in addition to that, make sure to have a follow-up system, at least a series of a few emails that will now indoctrinate those people into your world. It's Again, these are the most engaged people from that person's audience if you're guesting. So you want to make sure that they're getting to know you now. Don't just to kind of assume they know who you are and your background and superpowers. So having at least a handful of emails that bring people in. But then if we're talking about your podcast, if you have your own show, similar idea. Yeah. Let's talk about, like, if you're starting a podcast episode or a series, let's call it those 5 episodes. That can be a perfect way to highlight your lead magnet, and create this lead gen system. So I guess I'm bouncing back and forth a little bit. Another call to action I would do on guest episodes is bring them back to your show. That's probably the easiest call to action you could do. Is, like, podcast listeners usually listen to, I think, on average 5 to 7 other podcasts. So that's a stat I read, I think, last year. Could have changed, but either way, make sure to shout out your podcast so they're at least going and popping over there. And if you have this series of episodes on your own show, let's call it 5 to 10 episodes, make sure to have some of those initial episodes leading to a lead magnet, and taking them down the rabbit hole a little further with you after they get to kind of know you, and that could be a whole dedicated episode as well, or a couple of them that you break down that the value in that lead magnet, and then make it very clear, like, hey, go a little deeper with me. I have even more down here that I can't really express in audio. And just being very deliberate. I would say in all episodes, have call to actions. You always want to have a pre-roll. Pre-roll is kind of like the first, as early as you can get, but almost like early enough where you're not going to annoy people with an ad. It's always like this delicate balance. You kind of want to hook them a little bit, and then maybe 5 minutes in, give a little shout out to something of value. A mid-roll, kind of part way through is good. To have another shout out, maybe it's a different lead magnet, or prompting people to go rate and review, subscribe. Those are things you want to be intentional about.
This is great. We have done this very successfully with the quick wins audit we have on our website available. So people head over to SEO Leverage, get a quick wins audit. We check out their website manually, and they get a review, and we do a call and give them like a little bit of an action plan. And this has been working really, really well for us. It might be my personal experience or opinion, those checklists, everybody is hearing and getting checklists from everywhere, so I don't like them too much anymore. But it feels like if they understand somebody's actually taking the time to check out their website, and with a certain goal in mind, this seems to be valuable enough to actually move people. So if you can bring this across, that seems valuable. Obviously, I love the cross promotion you mentioned. To mention obviously your other podcast, that if you have one, people probably know you already from hustleandflowchart.com. If you don't, head over to this site and listen to Joe's podcast. It's amazing. And Thank then you. One thing I know people have in mind when it comes to their new show is obviously, where do I get my audience from, right? So you can obviously upload your podcast. You are going to get a few downloads here and there. You might promote it to your list. But how can people actually get their podcast off the ground?
Yeah, there's so many ways to go around it. And usually we have an audience that we're starting with in some regard. It could even be 100 people, it could be 1,000 people. But focus on those people first. I'm always figuring out, okay, who are the buckets of people you have? And if you don't have your own, who's your network, and who do they have? And that's why I always say the guesting approach is such a powerful approach, because not only can you guest on that podcast, you now can create this referral machine when done right, with follow-ups to those guests. You can ask for referrals to more shows, other people with similar audiences. And that's going to bring probably the most quality people to your shows. It might not be the quickest, but podcasting in general, it's a long game, but it's this thing that's flywheel. Once you get the wheels in motion, then you get more referrals. And I feel like it's a lot more people inbound coming to you who are offering their virtual stage to you. And or if you have your own podcast, you now are starting to get people that are saying, hey, I'll share my episode that you bring me on to my audience. That's when you actually focus on that, or maybe even ask people, hey, is that a thing? Like if someone's reaching out to you, because I know Gert, you mentioned you have a lot of people reaching out to be on your show. I do as well. And I don't think it takes people a long time to start getting those inbound requests. And I'm not saying they're all people that you want to bring on, but sometimes they might have a great topic, but also they're willing to share it to their, let's say, their 100,000 followers on social, or sometimes their email list. And that's very valuable. And more people are starting to realize that's an advantage to, to their pitch, of course. So I've done that very well as well. I feel like it's always in the follow-up, with any of these people, and being very intentional. If we're going to, if you have an email list, you got to tell people about your podcast, and start with any of these appearances you're doing on other shows, because again, that could be repurposed for your own content to start your own thing. There's a lot of paid ways to go about growing a show as well. Not a lot of folks are familiar with the fact that you can advertise on platforms, podcast apps themselves. There's a lot of ways to integrate your brand. Spotify does have ads. They're a little bit more generic or broad, but I imagine they're getting better and better. So you can look into platforms like Spotify, Google, Facebook ads. You can definitely run those to your websites. I've done that a lot. I'm actually firing up some more Google ads right now to go to the podcast, and you could go to specific episodes, and kind of leverage the likeness even of other people or their brands. That's been effective. Overcast.com is an example that I'll toss out there, of a podcast app, an independent one, where you can pay for ads in specific categories. And sometimes it's like, a max episode or max number of shows can purchase these ads, and essentially you're placed within the category in that app. And there's a whole slew of apps like that, because there's all these podcast apps out there that have ways to integrate your show. It's just doing the research and figuring out, okay, where are my people? And these things are pretty effective, to be very honest. That's how we, back in the day, I say we, my previous co-host, Matt Wolf, and I, we used to pay a lot of these apps. Not much. It was maybe a couple grand over a series of a handful of months. And we saw a dramatic spike in new listeners and subscribers that seemed to stick for a while. You're always going to get drop off with paid ads, but do that in combination with the organic, and you'll start to grow that show pretty quickly.
I love that. So we either are a guest on our show, or we launch a new show. If we launch a new show, we obviously, well, in both cases, we have in mind the target audience. We have in mind, and we don't, if it's our show, bother too much with the tech and the equipment. We have a lead magnet in place, so bring people to our website, mention our podcast. We amplify with our list, with our network, with the list our network might have. I think this is a good one. Many people don't have on their radar. In our case, for example, at SEO Leverage, we don't really monetize the podcast as such. We try to provide value, get the word out about SEO Leverage, and people then usually reach out and say, hey, listen to this podcast. I have the same, onto this episode, I have the same issue. Can you help me with this? But I know podcasters very often look for a direct way to monetize their show, apart from the potential business behind it. What are your thoughts here?
It could be a good way to monetize. In early days, it's very tough, to monetize something that doesn't have a lot of views or impressions, downloads. The typical cost per earnings, or cost per thousand, it's something like $30, $25 to $30 per thousand downloads. So that's like that's if an agency were to pay you for an ad spot, let's say. It's not going to make you a lot of money. You need to have quite a bit of downloads. That's if you're going for big reach, and not many podcasts do that. So I would suggest, if you want to monetize directly on your shows, there's ways to, I would say, always go for flat rate. That's something that I've done always. Like, figure out, you could work deals, but start with a number that's not based off of your downloads per se. Like, you want to integrate your entire media platform, whatever that looks like for you. So you have your podcast, email list, social media following, your blog or your website, where your show notes live. And there's a lot of other ways you can kind of work the deal.
Mhm.
Maybe you're promoting something else a little further in an email sequence potentially.
Right.
Something recently that's worked well, and it's part of the series that we're doing with SEO, is to attach a sponsor to a series of episodes you put out.
Right.
And I'm doing that right now with Hrefs,
Mhm.
for the SEO series that we're doing, Gert, and
Mhm.
it's very effective. I feel like it's more of a value add, because now you're attaching a sponsor who, and I've had this relationship with them, but initially they they just knew that I have internet marketers or content creators that want to leverage SEO, and here's a tool. So getting very clear with obviously the intentions, or who's the dream sponsor that I would love to partner with. Make yourself look like a great resource to them. And because most people aren't doing that. If you're a podcaster, they're just looking for the paycheck and shouting out something quick and then moving on. It's like,
I was going to say, it seems like, especially in the initial phases, like a very direct and proactive approach is going to get you more money if you just look for the best fit for each type of or each topic you
yeah,
kind of mention, and can reach out to them and say, hey, this is going to be evergreen, it's going to be episode 13 forever, and it's going to, we're mentioning several times that this is sponsored by your brand. Um,
mhm,
is that we're going to run ads to it. We offer this. I have seen people offer this like a media kit and say, okay, this podcast is just part of it, but we have it in over 2 months in an email series, and 1 year later we talk about this episode still here and there, and it's always going to
right,
be mentioned. It's definitely a very attractive offer, and this also speaks about a little bit the evergreen exposure people get with the podcast, right? So you get, but also the
yeah,
sponsor gets, because this podcast episode is going to sit there for a while and it's going to accumulate more downloads.
that's right, yeah. And as a direct approach, that's what I would suggest. But as I'm right there with you, Gert. Like, I love the indirect approach where, and this is why I like working with business owners who understand the power of podcasting and the fact that you have an engaged audience. The people who are listening, even if it's 100 people, 20 people, these people they are your most active subscribers or your audience. They're the people who are really there for you. And they really attach, and they should really understand what are the products and services you have to offer. Give them a direct line on how to become a customer. And this is where it goes back to lead gen. Give them something that you can capture the email address, because not everyone who's listening, even if they're a loyal fan, might not be on your email list.
Mhm.
So you want to you want to check that box and make sure that it's very clear that they need to be there, because they'll get a lot more from you
Mhm.
there, and it extends their journey. It just gives them more value. But at the same time, yeah, be very clear about the products and services you offer as well. And the more you just put it out there, even if it doesn't have to be a perfect, you're not making the offer per se, it could be, but put it out there, because you never know. This always attracts attention from the people who are really attached to you. And if you give them a clear way to reach out for more information, could even be just your email address. You could be crazy and put your phone number out there. I mean, some people do it. I've done it before. And to be honest, like when you put that out there, it comes back. And like you said, Gert, it's an evergreen thing. It's not like, if you have 100 people listening now, it'll be like that forever. You might look back in a year from now and 1,000 people have listened to that episode. And that's why I keep saying this flywheel, it starts to compound if you keep doing this. And with intention, it doesn't have to be tough. It's just
Mhm.
have a plan for it and just do it.
I love that. I want to definitely ask you before we wrap this up about processes and a few other things.
Yeah.
But before I was just remembering, I've been interviewed on a lot of podcasts in the last years, but I think
Mm.
there were only 2 or 3 where I got an overwhelming feedback, but overwhelming. And one of those shows was Hustle and Flowchart. And
Awesome.
this
Thanks.
just really showed me how much value there is when you manage to create some sort of community around your podcast. And
Mhm.
I know this is something you have a lot of experience with. You're very close to your fans, your listeners, your followers. You have a very close relationship. You interview guests that you know are a perfect fit for them. But how can a podcast like mine, for example, I don't think we are anywhere near this status just yet. How can can somebody really stimulate this and create a little bit of a community around something like a podcast, which might even be only
Yeah.
available in an audio version?
Yeah. And that's honestly, my podcast, Hustle and Flowchart, has been primarily audio
Yeah.
the whole time. There's been some glimmers of video, and it's definitely starting to happen now.
Mhm.
I have a lot of things in the works internally that are about to get published, but starting a community, I think it starts with us as hosts and or as a guest even to be real, like to really not feel like because it's interesting with audio, like when you're just listening to someone, you can hear the truth of people. You can kind of tell if they're holding something back or if they're
Yeah.
not really speaking their truth. And I've really focused on that, and I think it's a comfort thing. You just start sharing. You really don't. You want to do what's right for the audience,
Mhm.
and I always have thought this is people trust me to curate the best people for my show. It's up to me to do that. Like I've always been the gatekeeper more or
Mhm.
less. And because if I'm just bringing on anyone onto the podcast, well, people aren't going to really have as much trust with me. Or if it's a topic, and I've experienced this too, shifting to like a little diversion to Web3 for a handful of months or so, lost some people, and honestly, the trust of folks, and I don't blame them. And that's where I've gotten real about that as well. So I feel like always, yeah, I don't know what the term is, but like put your heart on your shoulder, or your sleeve or something, but like put it out there and people will get that you're an awesome person and someone to trust. And again, podcasting it's all about trust. It's all about connection and co-creation. Like I love all this stuff because it's a business. Like that's what businesses are, and communities, and if you can do that and express yourself in a way where you're not holding back and you always have the listener in mind, I think they're going to pick up on that through the audio, because it's a one-to-one conversation typically with podcasts.
Absolutely.
And from there, I'm always thinking of their journey. Like, what's the next step that they want to take? And I don't want to say should, but you want to develop a journey for them. So put yourself in their shoes and really understand where they're at. What are the pain points they're going through, and speak to that, relate to them with your own, and give them the next best step to take at
Do,
that point.
do you think there is
Yeah.
value in connecting listeners in some sort of community, Facebook group, private forum, or something like this? Have you seen something like that?
I've done it. I've done it, and it's interesting. I just sent a message to my Facebook group the other day for the first time in a long time, and there's almost 4,000 people in the group, and that's developed over the years. It's taken a lot of time, so I think there's a lot of value in it. Like my wife started a Facebook group for wedding people in the wedding space. She has a podcast, or a business partner took it over now. She started that thing with just a hand. Her sisters were like they basically started this together to kind of get it going. Now it's up to 60,000 people, and
Wow.
it's insane. Meta's reached out to her to feature them because they're like, you're doing something right.
Wow.
And it's because they integrated this community they didn't make it specific to their brand. They made it a little broader that speaks to the audience and their pain points and where they're at. And that might be the smarter approach than to make a fan page around you and your brand, which is what I did. But and there's value, and it's great to that too. But it's a lot more narrow than going wide. So I guess what I would suggest is figure out, do you want to go wider? Because maybe that serves your business as a whole, which is why she did that. And now that becomes a lead generation. It becomes an organic traffic driver for her too. Like she's not, it's just Facebook sending them traffic. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's value there for sure. If you use it. And again, there's moderation. There's things that you want to keep up with that group. Start with the email list, though. I think the email list is, I mean, you can't get better than having email. You own it, more or less.
Mhm.
You can control it. You're not always going to get people feedback, or responding to your emails, even if you're prompting them. But keep prompting them. Keep asking for feedback for, like I share episodes every single week of the ones that I publish, and I always give them a good reason. I try to, at least, to respond to me, and because I want to hear what they're thinking
Mhm.
and engage with them further that way. Or maybe it is to direct them to a Facebook community. Another tool that I'm considering, our membership platform, is called School, Skool, and that has a whole community element built in, but it has the actual content as well. I'm not affiliated with them or anything, but I'm hearing a lot of good stuff where it's like, okay, when there's a community based thing, but then deeper training in there, that could be a great way to integrate stuff. And
Mhm.
it could be a free community, maybe a continuity, a paid thing, as low or as
Yeah.
high as you want. James Schramko's a champion when it comes to continuity and creating community through
Mhm.
forums and all that. So
I love
there's
that.
a lot of value there. Yeah.
I love that. I know you're doing this professionally, podcasting strategies, systems, processes, etc. You offer this as a service and help people set
Mhm.
this up, be more successful guests, help them with the entire process. Can you speak a little bit about how you help somebody to define a podcasting strategy and then actually implement this with their team, maybe the steps they need to take, the tools they need to use? What does this look
Yeah.
like if somebody comes to you with and wants to actually succeed with podcasting as a medium?
Cool. Yeah. Great question, man. And I think it all starts with the person. I always want to understand, what are they currently doing in there, and typically they have a business that's already functioning. Many times now it's starting to be that they want to escape the profession or the business they've been in that's dragging them down, and they want to go a little bit more scaled and speak their truth or their passion. So I want to figure out like what they're doing now, what's working, what's not, but ultimately where do they want to go? And that's the first thing I always do. I have this pretty extensive survey that I always send my clients to really understand that. And then it starts to get into, okay, so what are the barriers of getting to that point, that place you want to go? Because a lot of these folks at that point, they see the value of podcasting. So a lot of times not only is it getting the word out or the message of the thing they have in their mind, the thing they want to share, because they're typically seeing other people. They're like, I see this other expert out there with a podcast with a lot of exposure. They're getting PR. They're probably generating a bunch of leads. We don't always know this, but I could do that too. Like, I want to do that.
Mhm.
Why not me? And so they know, okay, with podcasting, audio, video, we could package this up in a way to essentially get you seen by way more people and on stages, get the press. And it's really understanding what's motivating them. And then for that, it's figuring out, okay, typically it starts with the guesting. So, like, with the process I take them through is similar to what we've been chatting through right here. So the first stage is, all right, so let's guest on podcasts. Let's go leverage other people's stages. But before we do that, figure out the Dream 100 and figure out with intention who should be on that list. And again, we dove into that in the last episode.
Mhm.
But when you start to like realize, okay, that Dream 100 list, it aren't just the people you want to connect with to go on their show. They can become affiliate partners, JV partners, business partners, referral partners that bring you business or bring you more people. And or they could be even just the connectors, the ones that are bringing together, let's call it local groups, virtual summits. I mean, there's so many things that you can do to leverage other folks, and because they want you too. I mean, a lot of these people are searching for experts and people. If you present yourself in a way that is a perfect fit, well, more often than not, the doors are going to open, and then that leads to more doors to open after that. So going after that, I mean, launching a podcast, there's a very quick way to launch a podcast. It's a lot around what we were talking about here, but then it goes deeper in understanding, what's that journey, and really mapping out what the journey is, and then almost doing a speed launch to a podcast.
Yeah.
That's what I like to do with people, so it's not a daunting thing that feels like work. I think that's the big thing is I'm always trying to solve for the time aspect. Most people get hung up that it's going to take forever. I don't know the people to execute the work for me. those are all things I'm solving for. So helping them create like a workflow for this whole thing to function without them having to essentially, stay up all night editing their own episodes, doing all the outreach. And it's there's a lot of automations with AI will help, workflows that we've developed and we're sharing, and then also the people. So I'm helping kind of source who are the core people to actually make this thing work.
No, that's
Doesn't take a lot of
definitely
money either. Yeah.
definitely very helpful. I remember an article I read before starting my first podcast. It was years ago in Spanish, and
Yeah.
it talked about all the things I need to do and take care of when it comes to podcasting. It was so overwhelming. I set it aside, I think, for 6 months and said, okay, I'm not going to focus on this. And obviously, in hindsight, working with someone like you, it could have really been a shortcut, and probably the podcast would have been more efficient right away. Because
Yeah.
just winging it very often, then you at some point you regret it and say, okay, you could have really gotten some help initially at least to get this
Mm.
thing started, and then obviously amplify it to actually have an impact. It is a time commitment on a regular basis. People
Yeah.
definitely are aware, I think, when they start this, that they probably want to continue this, but at the same time minimize the time, maximize the impact. So I love
Yep.
what you shared here on the show about guesting, about how to strategically make sure you actually make this work. This podcasting to profit system you have developed, is this something you are sharing with your audience?
I just closed up this small group, and it was kind of like a beta group, and but it is something that I am scaling. That's a more of an evergreen approach. So maybe depending on the time this goes live, either way, I would love to share it with a lot more people, because what I've done with all this one-on-one group essentially is what this has been, but it's like a mini group. It's like 10 people.
Mhm.
So and I started with my folks to really understand what are the needs, I'm getting a lot of feedback, and I
Awesome.
think it's been so valuable. So but I would love to share it with more people after this little mini group gets done.
Definitely.
So
Just let us
yeah.
know. We definitely link this in our
Cool.
on our website. By the way, this is going to be published on seoleverage.com/podcast. We have episode 112 here. So when this is going to be available, we certainly link to it from our show notes here. Joe, this was so
Thank you.
generous from you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us again. I hope we can have you back in the near future, continuing to
Mhm.
talking about podcasting, AI, and all the stuff only you talk you know about here in my surroundings. So you're the go-to
Yeah.
guy. Whoever we just had a client reach out to us about AI, and I said, like, just talk to Joe and podcasting. Yeah, perfect. Talk to Joe. He's going to help you further. So I appreciate you having you in my network and being able
Yeah.
to refer people to you. Thank you so much for everything you were sharing. Where can people get in touch with you?
Yes, I'll give you a couple options. And one of them is you can go to hustleandflowchart.com/SEO leverage.
Oh,
And
wow.
you can you can get there is a checklist, but that checklist I've been told is it's very in depth. But what I want to give you as well is exactly what you were saying, Gert. Basically, let's do a chat. I want to talk with the people who are reaching out. If you're serious, I respect your time, and I respect the fact that we've already spent this time together. So I'll pair up an audit, a chat with me. We'll do something quick. Let's call it 15 minutes to start, but like we can dive into what your thoughts are around podcasting, and you can go to hustleandflowchart.com/SEO leverage. And I wouldn't say but and email me. Go to just email me and reach out, joe@hustleandflowchart.com, and tell me that Gert sent you and you heard me on the podcast here. So I would love to chat with you, because
This
I
is
take it seriously that you've spent the time with us and you actually want to do this.
This is very generous. Thank you so much, Joe. I know from my personal experience, whenever I talk to you, I learn something, learn about new tools, new strategies, new things of thinking about AI and podcasting. So everybody getting a chance to talk to you should use this. And definitely, if you're listening to this and thinking of getting on a podcast as a guest, get your preparation ready, get some help prepared for this. It definitely pays off, and the impact is going to be 10x of what you actually can get, which is already a lot. So thank you so much, Joe. Hope we can talk
Appreciate it.
soon and have you back on the show soon. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Thank you very much, Gert. Thanks everyone.